In the late 1980s, one game dominated the arcades. Its name?
Ninja Turtles!
Well, yes, but that's not the one I was talking about. This one was genre-defining. It wasn't the first beat-em-up, but it was the one that set the standard for all future beat-em-ups. Its name?
Renegade!
No.
Well, which one was it then?
Stop interrupting me, and I'll tell you. Its name was
Double Dragon! Did I guess right? What do I win?
Released in arcades in Japan back in 1987, Double Dragon was originally planned as a sequel to the Kunio-kun series of side-scrolling beat-em-ups before it got spun off into its own series, in a similar way to how Final Fight spun off from Street Fighter. If you think you're not familiar with the Kunio-kun series, you probably are, because in the West it's called River City in some areas and Renegade in others. I'd put good money on you recognising at least one of those names, because it was that big a deal refining the side-scrolling fighting genre. Double Dragon is a violent depiction of a city overrun by gangs. These thugs terrorise people with seeming impunity, but two brothers decide that they've had enough when one of their students is violently assaulted and kidnapped from outside their dojo. But who are these brothers? Well, in the original arcade flyers, they're known as Hammer and Spike, obvious nicknames, and it wasn't until the home consoles that we got to find out what they were actually called. They're Billy and Jimmy Lee, an obvious reference to Bruce Lee, specifically the Bruce Lee from Enter the Dragon, and since there's two Lee brothers, it's Double Dragon. So the Lee brothers punch, kick, maim and kill their way through hordes of assorted goons as they venture through 4 levels of action to confront the leader of the gang that kidnapped their student. So far, so typical for a martial arts story. But what's not so typical is what happens at the end. If you're playing in 2-player mode, which many of us often did because it's an arcade game and it was rather hard, then the ending is shocking. Once the enemy is defeated, the two brothers turn on one another and fight for the supposed right to date the girl that they've just been fighting to rescue. Yeah, doesn't seem so heroic now, does it? I mean, sure, the 80s were a different time and standards were different, but dating a student is still dating a student. So, I'm not entirely sure that was the best interpretation they could have put on an ending. But here we are, that's canonical. But yeah, let's leave talk about whether these guys are creeps or not and go back to what the arcade was actually all about. I first encountered the Double Dragon arcade game in France. A friend and I used to wander down to a local arcade almost every day just to play this particular game. It was around 1992, so the machine itself was getting a little long in the tooth by arcade game standards, but it still drew quite a crowd and we loved playing it. I can't think of how much money I've pumped into this machine, and it wasn't the cheapest machine I've ever seen either, but it was a huge amount of fun. The sprites were big and looked amazing, and the combat, well, that was spectacular. It's a game that stuck in my mind for a very long time after. Aside from the fun that I had playing the arcade game in France and pumping franc after franc into this machine, because I'll tell you this, you go through those 3 lives you get on every credit very quickly on this kind of game. I never actually completed it, and it's something that stuck with me until I got back into the UK and I decided it's about time that I saw the ending of this game. So I tried to find a copy for my beloved Amstrad CPC. It was the home computer that I had, so naturally it was the version that I wanted to play the game on. And that was a bit of a challenge. Not finding the game, playing it. Let me explain. The first thing you need to know about Double Dragon on the Amstrad CPC is that there are 2 versions. The first is the original version, obviously, created at the same time as all of the other 8-bit ports. And the second version is a reworked version that came out alongside the 16-bit ports. We'll look at both of these in turn. The first version looks absolutely fantastic and really shows off what the Amstrad CPC was capable of putting out there when in the hands of an expert visual designer who actually had time to do great work. Unfortunately, it seems all of the time and effort went on the graphics, because there is no sound except for an occasional Atari-level bang-pop effect when hitting an opponent. If that's not bad enough, the gameplay is slow and choppy. Playing this game feels like trying to play a flipbook animation or a Tiger LCD game. The redone version has excellent sound. It moves pretty fluidly actually, and the gameplay is far above most arcade ports of its era. It's a decent game to play, and if you're looking for a copy of Double Dragon that's worth playing on an 8-bit home computer, this is definitely the one to go for. Its weakness is the graphics, which appear to have been ported straight across from the Atari ST version and then not cleaned up. Perhaps it didn't have time. It is a bit of a visual mess, and that ruins the experience a bit because it's all too easy for the characters to blend in with the background, and consequently you end up getting hit by people that you didn't see until it was too late. When I played Double Dragon on the Amstrad, I played the original version. It would never have occurred to me to look for a different version, like a redone one. That just never happened. The fact that there are 2 Double Dragons on the Amstrad is very, very strange. This sort of thing just doesn't happen. You make a game and you sell the game and then you move on to the next game. That was always the way it was. So we would never have thought, well, this version's not that good, perhaps there's another one. It just wouldn't have entered our minds to even think about that. The only time we would have potentially noticed a second version of a game is if one of us had a copy of the game and we were playing it so much with our friends that our friends wanted to get a copy of their own, so they went out and bought one, and then one of them happened to have accidentally found the second version, and then we all go, whoa, that's a bit weird. But that would never happen with this game, because this game wasn't the kind of game that you played and thought, I want a copy of that as well. So we never saw it. There was another version of Double Dragon that I did see though, and it wasn't the other Amstrad version. This one was actually ZX Spectrum. I played it a few times on one of my friend's computers. So let's take a look at the Spectrum version. Can it be any better? Let's hope so. Oh good grief, it's even worse! It's worse than the first Amstrad version. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it was the first Amstrad version, just with Spectrum graphics stuck on it. Yeah, this game is more fluid, sure, but it's by no means perfect. There's a noticeable pause between a character being hit enough to fall onto the ground and them actually falling on the ground. The sound effects are still on the same level as the Atari 2600, and yeah, I know this is the 48K Spectrum, which only has a bleeper instead of a sound chip, but that bleeper could do so much better sound than what's on show here. Oh, and you have to hear the sound effect for when you beat up one of the whip ladies. What on earth were they thinking? It's like attacking a squeaky toy. So yeah, on the whole, it's not the best Spectrum game I've ever played by a long shot, but it's also, funnily enough, not the worst. I used to play Renegade on the Spectrum. That was the game that I grew up with playing the most on the Spectrum when it came to beat-em-ups. That was a good game. This, not so much, let's put it that way. So, home computers have one more shot to see whether they can make it better. Let's take a look at the Commodore 64 and hope that the big boy of the old home computers can do this game justice. Oh my goodness, what have they done to this game? The sprites have a gap in the middle. Now, I get that they're using multiple sprites to make the characters look taller, but come on guys, you can't just leave a hole in the middle of them and hope that no one will notice. It looks stupid. The sound effects seem to be ported straight over from the Spectrum version, which is simply disgraceful. The SID chip can handle far better than this, and they aren't even trying to tax it. They've just got blips and bleeps. Gameplay-wise, this might actually be the worst version so far. It takes far too long to knock an opponent down because most of your hits don't seem to do any damage whatsoever, and actually getting a guy on the ground so you can move on takes the patience of a saint. This is an unbelievable mess of a game. The Commodore could do far better than this. It deserved far better than this. This is the best-selling computer ever in the 80s. So you knew there was a market there for this. If you made a game for the Commodore, you knew that you had a potential market that was huge. And that's what they decided was worth putting out? They couldn't have spent a bit more time on it? I just don't get it. It's dreadful, absolutely dreadful. Hopefully, we can now have a look at the home console versions, and fingers crossed, it will be better. Showing you the Master System version is the reason that we aren't using genuine hardware to get game footage for this episode. Normally we do, but I don't have a Master System in my office. I use a Mega Drive with the Master System converter plug-in. It's a Mega Drive 1, and unfortunately they sometimes have a little bit of an incompatibility when it comes to sending out the video signal to how I record the video. Normally it's perfectly fine, but for some reason the vibrant colours on Double Dragon, they just look horrible when you put the Mega Drive 1 through my video capture software. I don't know where it is, it just looks terrible. Just using an emulator already fixes that. But since we're using an emulator on one game, it seemed only fair to let all the others get the high resolution emulator treatment as well. Anyway, Double Dragon on Master System is an absolute delight to play. The graphics are nice, the characters, yeah, they're much smaller than they usually would be on an arcade game, and they look a little bit more chunky, but they're nice too, and the game itself plays really smoothly. Combat's decent enough, and the controls, they're responsive, really good. If I had to find a downside, it would be that doing a jump or a flying kick requires you to push both fire buttons at once. It's a little tricky to pull off sometimes. It works, but it's a little tricky. The music though, oh, that's fantastic, and while the sound effects are a little silly at times, they've gone so far as to make some of the hit noises sound almost like speech, which is a really nice touch. So all in all, this is a very nice port, and I'm glad to finally be playing a version of this game that's actually enjoyable. So finally we get to play a good version of Double Dragon at home. Excellent, Master System, you did good. But can your big brother the Mega Drive also hold up? Let's take a look. Wow! If you told me this was the arcade version, I might actually believe you. This looks, sounds and plays brilliantly. Having an extra button on the controller really does help with gameplay too. This is a great port. The controls, they're responsive, the animation, it's fluid, the gameplay, yeah, it's all here. I love this. I might go as far as to say this is the definitive version of Double Dragon for the home systems. Wow guys, I wish I'd had this version when I was growing up. I probably would have converted to console gaming a lot earlier than I eventually did. Wow, someone definitely favoured Sega, didn't they? My goodness, that is a good port. But we can't leave out Sega's big old rival Nintendo, can we? Let's see what they got. Now, there isn't a version for the Super Nintendo, not as far as I can tell. Super Double Dragon is a game unto itself, and we will review that at another time. So, all we've got now is the NES. Let's go and take a look. Sorry, what's that? There's a Game Boy version? We're going to jump in and do the Game Boy version first. Nobody in their right mind would ever describe the Game Boy as a powerhouse of graphical excellence. Its 4-colour screen and limited viewing angles, plus the relatively low resolution of that screen, would often be a limiting factor on what you could get out of a Game Boy game. Nevertheless, what we've got here is recognisably Double Dragon, and it plays incredibly well. The use of darker colours for the background makes sure that the characters and the enemies stand out, even when you're playing on a small Game Boy screen. Every character is nicely drawn and decently animated. Well, I say every character. I have to make an exception for the Whip Ladies. They are completely lacking faces. No joke. No faces at all. What the hell, guys? All the male enemies have faces, why don't the ladies? This is very creepy. Please tell me that this was a design oversight because, well, otherwise I hate the idea that this was done on purpose, because it makes me think someone might have been getting off on it. Anyway, the music is simply amazing, despite the Game Boy's limitations, and I really enjoyed playing this version. It's really good. Which leaves us with only one version left to talk about, the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, which I've held off talking about a lot on this channel because I'm British, and here in the UK, the NES did not work very well. The Mattel system that was originally released, Mattel ran the marketing, sold it in places like Boots the Chemist, rather than other places you would find a Nintendo or a Sega or anything like that. And as a result, it failed to find a market share. Nintendo eventually took over and created a new version which wasn't 100% compatible with the Mattel version that was already out. So, in the end, you had two versions. Well, can I play this game on my version? I don't know, so no one really looked into buying it. I didn't see a NES in the flesh until 1994. That's the level that we're at. So as a Brit, I have no nostalgia for Nintendo's original system, and consequently, I've never felt good about talking about it too much. But this is Double Dragon, and everyone knows Double Dragon on the NES is apparently a classic, so we have to look at it. Here we go. We're going to take a look at the Nintendo Entertainment System. Let's do it! Well, bloody hell, it's really good. In many ways, it's similar to the Master System port, but there's a definite something else going on with this version, because it felt that little bit more fluid. It's hard to explain exactly why, but everything just feels that little bit quicker, a little more tweaked, a little more polished, and a little bit more fun. I can't put my finger on exactly why, but something is being done right here. The music, it's fantastic, and the more muted colours compared to the Sega palette grounds the game in a little bit more realism, at least at first. There's nobody with flaming pink hair right away, but when the yellow-skinned guys with purple hair start showing up, it does go back to being a little bit silly. It's not quite let's have a giant green Mr. T as a boss battle, like in the arcade version, although there are green people, but it's still a little bit silly. Nevertheless, this is clearly an absolute classic, and on this occasion, the hype from the internet has actually paid off. So, wow, the internet got it right for once. That is a hell of a game. The hype was worth it. It was justified. And it means that now we have 3 options if you want to play Double Dragon. You could go for an arcade experience if you can get your hands on an arcade, which actually isn't as hard as I would think these days. A lot of barcades will have an arcade of Double Dragon somewhere in them, so get yourself a drink, get yourself down there with a friend, and try some 2-player action. You need to play Double Dragon 2-player at least once in the arcade. It is the ultimate version of it, and the ultimate experience. What's the second option? Well, go for one of the console versions, whether it's the Game Boy, the Master System, the NES, or the Mega Drive. Mega Drive is probably the pinnacle, but all of them, if I'm honest with you, are excellent choices. There's a lot of good fun in those versions. The third option is to not bother, because let's face it, even with that second Amstrad port, the home computer versions just aren't cutting it. Go for the consoles, go for the arcades. The Double Dragon experience is, well, it's hard to describe how much you would be missing out on if you went for a home computer version over a console or the arcade. If you haven't played the consoles or arcade, it's just missing so much. But Double Dragon is definitely worth it. Give yourself a chance to play it. I think if you like fighting games, you'll enjoy this one. Okay, that's all we got time for this time, but thank you so much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it, and if you have, remember to click that like button, share it with your friends, so that they'll know some good games when they see them, and do subscribe for future videos, because there will be more in the future. But until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk Robinson, you've been watching GameHammer Classic Gaming, and I'll see you next time. If you like the show, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help create future videos. That's patreon.com/Zoe Kirk Robinson. And I've got an extra special thanks going out to Chief89, Sam Yates, Retro Mickey82, Mo Henry, and George Botterini. Thank you so much, guys.